Hey you guys, welcome back to the salon. So today we're going to be talking about sort of like a classic of folk horror, the novel anyway, and the sort of disappointing movie adaptation of it. So let's get started. So I had actually been wanting to read Thomas Tryon's 1973 novel Harvest Home for quite a long time. I think the first time that I heard about it was in Stephen King's Dance Macabre, his nonfiction book, where I don't think he talked about it directly necessarily, but he had it listed in the back, in the appendix. He had like all these books that he recommended, and I went through a lot of those, like trying to read them. But I hadn't got around to reading it. Now, I really loved, I had read Thomas Tryon's 1972 book, The Other, and which is excellent. And the film adaptation of that is actually one of my favorite horror films of the 1970s. So a while back, I'm in like a few horror Facebook groups, and people were recommending books that had really frightened them, but they feel like not enough people talk about them. So one person actually recommended Harvest Home, and because I was reminded about it, I was like, oh yeah, I've been wanting to read that for a long time. So I just went to Amazon and I ordered like a used copy for like $2 or something like that, so I could finally get around to reading it. Now, much like Tryon's previous book, The Other, Harvest Home is an amazing book. It's awesome, especially if you are really into like folk horror. It really kind of like, it's one of those books that really ends up kind of like getting under your skin in the way that a lot of books don't. Now, if you haven't read it, I'm going to spoil some stuff from the book and the movie. They're kind of the same. And honestly, if you haven't read it or seen the movie or anything like that, some of the stuff I'm talking about, you might not know what I'm talking about, because I'm not going to go into like an exhaustive sort of plot synopsis. I'm just going to like compare and contrast like what I thought about the movie adaptation of the book. So you might want to like go read it first, or at least go watch the miniseries if you can find it. I found it on YouTube quite a long time ago, but I don't know if it's on there anymore. I think it was taken out for copyright, but you might be able to take it, you might be able to find it somewhere else. So the plot of the book, it's about this family from New York City. Now, the dad is named Nick Constantine. He's an artist, and he has a wife named Beth, and they have a teenage daughter named Kate. And they decide, like a lot of families in these folk horror kind of stories do, that they're kind of sick of the fast-paced life of New York City, so they want to get back to the land. So they end up moving to this very tiny rural New England town called Cornwall Coombe. And it's like this agricultural community, very arrested in time, I guess, but not like in a weirdo way necessarily, like in a very charming way, at least at first. Now, like I said, because this is a horror novel, shit's gonna go sideways at some point, and like this idyllic surface of this like lovely small town hides some horrible secrets. So much like The Wicker Man or, Stephen King's short story, Children of the Corn, Harvest Home, just like a lot of folk horror, in addition, it kind of like gets its scares and its terror out of this sort of clash of modern people encountering this sort of like ancient, pagan type of situation, which is essentially what happens here. Now, here's a dumb thing that I did, though, when I was reading the book. I don't usually do this. I don't know why I was compelled to do it in this particular case. So I'm reading the book and I'm having a blast with it. It's, it's very good. It's very creepy. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and I say to myself, I wonder if there was ever a movie adaptation of this novel. Now, because I had never heard of one, I assumed that had there been one, then it probably wasn't as great as The Other, because, that one comes up on a lot of like best horror movies of the 70s lists and stuff like that, and it's pretty well regarded. So I was like, well, I'm imagining nobody made one, right? Well, imagine my surprise when I go to Google and I find out that in 1978, NBC made a 4-hour miniseries based on this novel, and it was called The Dark Secret of Harvest Home. Now, again, I'm a dumbass, because I was like, oh, well, I should probably finish the book like before I watch this, because I don't want to spoil the ending. But for some reason, I don't know why, but I was just kind of like, man, my curiosity was like really killing me. Like, I wonder how this movie adaptation turns out. I guess maybe because I liked The Other so much, I really liked, Harvest Home while I was reading it, and I just was really curious. So I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna sit down and watch it. So I sat down like one night and I watched the whole thing like in one sitting. And like I said, it's like 4 hours long. Now, I ended up finishing the book the following afternoon. Now, I do wish that I had waited. I mean, it's always better to do this. I do wish that I had waited to finish the book before I watched the movie. But I do have to say that, the impact of the book's ending wasn't really dulled by knowing what the outcome was going to be. Even though I kind of knew, like, what ballpark and which way it was going, it was still, like, really impactful and really effective, even though I had already seen the movie. Now, there were a bunch of changes made from the book to the miniseries, obviously, which isn't always a bad thing because it's two different mediums and you have to adapt to the medium. Now, I did understand why most of the changes were made, but I do have to say that the miniseries as a whole, I think it just wasn't very scary. It just wasn't very effective. And I think the problem largely was one of, like, tone. It really didn't seem to follow the tone of the novel, and it really didn't seem to follow a lot of the characterization either, which was one thing that, like, really bothered me a lot. And interestingly, when I looked it up later, like on IMDb and stuff like that, the miniseries did seem to have, like, mostly positive reviews. But I didn't love it. I kind of, like, thought it was a little bit of a bummer. I just didn't like a lot of things about it. It had some good shit in it, but I don't know. I just didn't like it overall. There were, like, a lot of great actors in it for the time. Like, Bette Davis was in it. She's played the Widow Fortune. Rosanna Arquette was in it, like, as a teenager. She played the teenage daughter, Kate. Renee Auberjonois, who I had always knew. He's been in a ton of stuff, but I remember him from Benson because I used to watch that back in the old days. He played Jack Stump. And a very, very young Tracy Gold, who played Missy Penrose. She was in, what was that show she was on in the 80s? She was on, like, one of those, like, popular, like, sitcoms in the 80s. So, yeah, so it had great actors in it. It had some, like, effective scenes, but I kind of feel like some of the acting, too, and it depends on the thing, because a lot of times I really like late 70s TV movies. I've talked about one on this channel before, which was The Strange Possession of Mrs. Oliver. But there's kind of like another side to that where I kind of feel like a lot of TV movies from the 70s, they sort of had this, like, slightly off type of tone to the acting where everything is, like, a little bit overblown, like they're trying to make everything seem more dramatic maybe than it really is. And I feel like a lot of the conflict in this was kind of forced. Which I'll kind of, like, elaborate on in a bit. None of the characters or even the town itself of Cornwall Combe were really the same way that I pictured them in the book. It was just kind of, like, came off really, really different. And the movie didn't have this kind of, it didn't have this kind of, like, subtly increasing dread, you know what I mean? Which the book had big time, but, like, the movie, not so much. I have to say, too, that I found the miniseries kind of difficult to follow, and I don't usually have trouble with that kind of thing. I kind of feel like had I not read, like, 3/4 of the book before I watched it, I think I probably would have just been like, what the fuck is going on? And, like, just turned it off. Like, then I would have been, like, pissed off about it. I think, like, a lot of things got left out, or, like, some things were inadequately explained, and then some things were over-explained that probably didn't need to be. So the whole thing, it wasn't terrible, but I am kind of, like, bummed out that I watched it, which I guess that's not good. So I'm kind of, like, bummed out that I watched it because I kind of feel like the whole experience of reading the book, which was actually an overwhelmingly positive book because it's an amazing book, but now it's going to be kind of tainted because I was like, oh yeah, I watched that miniseries adaptation of it that wasn't very good, you know what I mean? So it's always going to be, like, associated with that, and that kind of, like, bums me out. So one of the things that bothered me the most, and I mean, I guess it's not a problem with this, miniseries in particular, but the problem with a lot of movies that are adapted from great books is that I feel like a lot of the subtlety of the book is abandoned. They're trying to make the movie scarier or, like I said, more dramatic. So things kind of go, like, more conflict, more over the top and stuff than they were in the book. One of the most frightening things about the book, I thought, was that it was really insidious. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the horror just, like, creeps up on the characters in the book as well as the reader, like, really, really slowly and really effectively. And it's so, I don't know, like, the horror is just so inconspicuous at first that when it does end up happening, it's really, really shocking, even though you've kind of been expecting it because you know this is a horror novel. So you know bad shit's going to happen, but it's still, like, really shocking when it happens. So, I mean, Thomas Tryon, the guy that wrote this novel, who also wrote the other, as I mentioned, he was also an actor. He was an actor before he started writing novels. In case you didn't know. I think he was in I Married a Monster from Outer Space, now that I'm thinking about it. That 50s sci-fi movie. That's neither here nor there. But anyway. But he's, like, really, really good at just doing this real slow drip of like, hey, everything's fine. It's like, oh, that's a little weird. Nah, yeah, that's a little weird too, but it's like no big deal. But it's just kind of like ramps up and ramps up. And then like you kind of know it's coming like in the back of your mind, but still like in the front of your mind, like, oh, everything's fine. Everything's, and you're like, holy shit, everything's not fine. You know what I mean? So he's really, really good at doing that. And I can't explain it any better than that, but he's like really good at sort of like weaving this hypnotic spell around you, like while you're reading it, and around the characters as well, and then like he pulls the rug out, and it's just like really, really great. So I have to say that when I was reading the book, I was kind of like enchanted by this town too, like of Cornwall Coombe. Because the characters get there and they're like, oh my gosh, no, what a charming place, you know what I mean? And they're just like super into it. So I was just as horrified as the characters were when everything like inevitably turned to shit, right? I felt betrayed just like the characters did. And I was just kind of like, man, that is some good fucking writing right there, because I was right there with the characters being like, fuck me, I can't believe, well, why would they do that? That's terrible. You know what I mean? So I kind of feel like he was really good at conveying that and like making you kind of like feel the same way as the characters did. That's the thing, like Cornwall Coombe seemed so nice, and not like in a fakey like Stepford Wives kind of way where it's like, oh, everything's like perfect but it's like weird. This wasn't like that at all. It was just kind of like you got to this town and it seemed like awesome. Like everybody was super nice and like genuinely nice. You know what I mean? Everybody seemed very salt of the earth. They were New England farmers. They were kind of stoic, but everybody seemed super friendly and super welcoming. Everybody just seemed like genuinely good people. Nothing really seemed sinister at first. Nothing seemed off or weird or anything like that. So the family gets there and everyone's just like, helping them out. And it's like, hey, you want some preserves or whatever the fuck. But as everybody was like just being really good to them. Now, yeah, there are a couple little strange things going on, like there are in any small town. Like there's these moonshiners called the Soaks family. They live out in the woods, and everybody's like, oh yeah, watch out for those guys because they're dangerous or whatever. There's little weird things too, like, oh, there's in the town cemetery, there's like this one grave that's like outside the fence. So that's a little weird, but like I said, not alarming or anything like that. Also, you have this woman in town who's kind of like the town slut, I guess you would call her, named Tamar Penrose, and she's always kind of like getting up at everybody's grill, like trying to get some, you know what I mean? So she's a little thirsty, but other than that, like I said, nothing weird. And like I said, those things aren't sinister on their face, and another thing too is that Tamar has a daughter who's like mentally challenged, and she is like a prophet. So she has this creepy like little corn doll, and she, obviously she's got like some, mental challenges, but everybody listens to her like when she tells them what the crops are going to be like, or if there's a tornado coming, I don't know whatever. But she prophesies everything like for the town, and everybody totally believes in her. So, but like I said, other than that, yeah, this place is like just really charming. Everybody's just like doing this like old agricultural way of life. They seem very happy with living the same way that their families did like over the centuries. And like I said, really nothing is terribly sinister until later. Like it really starts ramping up, but it ramps up very, very slowly. You don't get any hint that there's anything like horrific necessarily lurking below the surface, how bad shit's gonna get toward the end. You don't really get any of that, and that's why it makes it like way scarier. So in contrast though, the TV miniseries made the town seem weird right from the beginning, like as soon as they got there. Like, the townsfolk are like glancing significantly at one another, saying all kind of like dialogue that sounds like super sketch. It's like all this kind of stuff. So it was really obvious, like right from when the family first arrived in the town, that it's just, this is a scary place. You know what I mean? Like everything's weird. Now I get it. It's a pretty long book. It's 400 plus pages. And when you're adapting a book that long to a 4-hour miniseries, maybe it wasn't even 4 hours. It probably was just like 3.5 hours with the commercials that it would have had. But so when you're adapting it, yeah, you have to like get to the scary shit like quicker, because not everybody's going to want to sit around for fucking, hours and hours, like just watching people hanging out in a nice town. You know what I mean? So they kind of had to say, hey, get the eyeballs on it right away. Yeah, ooh, bad shit's going to happen. I get it. Okay. I didn't love it though, because that was kind of like my favorite thing about the book was how, like I said, insidious it was. So the TV movie didn't have that at all. They just showed up and everybody's like, man, this is like some creepy shit going on here. You know what I mean? I don't know. It just didn't work. The characters to me seemed too broad. I really liked Bette Davis as the Widow Fortune, actually. But I don't know. I felt like the characters were a little too over the top, a little too silly. And the thing about Bette Davis's character, too, or the Widow Fortune, in the book, she's just this very kindly, very selfless, very lovable, like grandma type woman. Nothing sinister, nothing creepy, nothing. She just seems like this awesome grandma, like I said. But in the movie, like I said, they make her seem creepy, kind of. Like, she's nice, but she still seems kind of like she says weird shit, and you know what I mean? So she's a little bit sideways, where it's not like that in the book. Like, in the book, you're actually, like, shocked when you find out that she's actually, like, super evil, because she in no way hints at that at all. So in the movie, like I said, they kind of, I feel like they had to speed stuff up and was like, let's make everything scary and creepy from the beginning. And I just didn't love that. I think probably, though, I mean, that was a big problem I had. I also have a massive, massive problem with the main character. Now, in the book, he's named Ned Constantine. In the movie, they changed his name to Nick Constantine for whatever reason. I don't really know. Maybe they thought Ned was too old-fashioned or nebbishy sounding. I don't really know. So I didn't love the way he was characterized in the movie. I also didn't like the way that his character in context of his relationship with his wife, Beth. Now, in the novel, the whole story is told from Ned's point of view. And so, consequently, you relate to him. You kind of grow to like him a lot as a person, or at least I did. He's a good dude. I mean, he fucks up a couple times, but everyone does. You know what I mean? And you feel for him. It seems like his heart's in the right place. And he does seem to love his family. He loves his wife very dearly. It does seem like there's some implication that they had some maybe like marital problems in the past. You know, you get the sense that they're working on it. You get the sense that they do have a deep love and respect for one another. And they seem like they're also like best friends. They seem like a team, you know what I mean? And in the novel as well, Ned is just as sort of taken, just as enchanted with Cornwall Combe as his family is. When they move there, he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm so glad we came out of the city. And he makes friends with like a bunch of the villagers, and he's an artist, like I said, so he paints and draws like presents for everybody. Like, he's like, oh, look, I painted a picture of your field, or, your family or whatever. And he just like gives them to people as gifts. So he's really kind of adapting to the community. He's into it. You know what I mean? He doesn't really realize the extent of the horror that's going on in the town until very late in the book, which actually makes his downfall a lot more tragic and a lot more terrible and a lot more shocking, because he was into it. And so the fact that like this town ends up being evil, he's just like, oh my God, I liked all you people. I was into it. I was going to stay here forever. I was going to do this and that. And then they fucked him over. So it was a lot more like, holy shit. You know what I mean? Now, in the movie, though, the character of Ned, whose name is actually Nick in the movie, he really seems like a douche hat. From the start, he's just like a raging asshole. He snaps at his wife all the time. Doesn't really want to go to the town, and it's like as soon as he gets there, he's like, God, look at all these fucking rubes. You know what I mean? It's that kind of stuff. And he's really seemed like keeping his distance, and he's very like arrogant and condescending. And he gets like outraged about stuff that he does. He's one of those like jerkwads that kind of like comes into a town where people have been doing the same shit forever, and he's like, you guys are doing it wrong. You know what I mean? He had like that kind of attitude. Like, there's this one scene, if you've read the book or watched the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But he finds like an old skull in the woods, right? Now, in the book, he's just kind of like, well, this is not my business. It's old, and obviously it's not a murder or anything like that. So I'm just gonna like see where the land lays. I'm not gonna tell anybody about it unless somebody like brings it up. He just seems to, I'm just gonna let sleeping dogs lie type of thing. Whereas in the movie, he finds a skull and immediately goes to the constable. Is like, what is this? I demand to know. You know what I mean? It's like he's like all outraged and shit, even though he doesn't know. I mean, that could be from the fucking cemetery. That could be anything. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, probably in the book he should have reported it, but I'm just saying, don't get up in everyone's face. Why do you guys have skulls in your woods? What is going on with that? You know what I mean? He's kind of like that. There's also a thing where in the novel, there was a woman that lived in the town named Grace Everdeen, and I think it was her grave that was the one that was outside the cemetery, which is why he got interested in it. And everybody said, oh, she committed suicide. So that does happen in the book, but in the movie, they made it so that he's like, he found out about this and he's like, oh, I don't think she really committed suicide, which, spoiler alert, she didn't. But he suspects that. This is in the movie. And he suspects that, and he's like, I'm gonna write a book about this shit. I'm gonna blow this whole thing wide open. Like, I'm gonna tell all this tell-all book. And he starts like making a real nuisance of himself, like going around the town, asking everybody about it. It happened like 14 years previously, by the way. And he goes around asking everybody about it and just being like kind of a dick. And nobody really wants to talk about it, like, bro, like, what the fuck? So, but yeah, he's like, ooh, this is how I'm gonna make my fortune. I'm gonna write this salacious book about this murder in a small town. It was like supposedly a suicide. It's a big cover-up and all this other kind of shit. Now, in the book, he wasn't doing that. Like I said, he was an artist. He wasn't writing a book. He wasn't doing a tell-all. He wasn't, like, making an ass of himself like the dude in the movie was. I mean, he wasn't exploiting the people of the town at all. He was just, yeah, he would paint some landscapes and shit, and then he'd sell them back to his gallery in New York. But that's not really, you know, he was just painting landscapes and shit like that. And mostly he was just doing work and, like, giving them away as gifts, because he was just like, you know, that's a thing that I do. And here, I'll give you because I'm being nice and I'm being neighborly and shit like that. It just seems like the whole relationship that he had with his wife and the loving relationship that he had with the townsfolk, like, he made close friends and everything like that. In the book, that made everything a lot scarier, like I said, because it was like a much bigger betrayal. He just felt like, I thought that you guys liked me, and I thought that we were having a thing, and I thought you welcomed me to the town, and then all of a sudden, like, all this bad shit happens. So it's like a much more shocking, you know, betrayal. Whereas in the movie, he was such a cock that I was just kind of like, well, when he gets like fucked up at the end, I was like, man, well, you probably had that coming. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure that's not what should happen. In the book, he was very sympathetic, and I felt bad. I was like, oh no. Like, whereas in the movie, I was like, meh. You know what I mean? Because he was such a jerk. And so I kind of feel like that really, really, like, undercut a lot of the horror, because I didn't care, like, when bad stuff happened to him because he was a dickhole. So I wasn't real happy about the portrayal of Beth in the movie either, like his wife. In the movie, she seemed like she came off as kind of, and this was common for a lot of female characters in horror movies in the 70s, I feel like, because I remember seeing a lot like this. But I feel like, you know, a lot of the women were like kind of therapy dependent, and they were sort of like a little bit neurotic, you know what I mean? And she basically like comes to the town and immediately gets sucked into all their traditions, even when they start getting like more and more sinister, like along the way. And she pretty much almost immediately like turns on her husband. In the context of the movie, I guess that's not surprising because he was such a dick, but in the book, it wasn't really like that. You know what I mean? In the book, Beth was a very intelligent, very reflective woman. She had her shit together, you know, and she loved her husband very much, like, you know, despite his minor failings, like I said, that we all have. She really only turns against him at the very end. And in the context of the book, it's probably like understandable how that happens. So I didn't like that in the movie they made their relationship a lot more contentious than it was in the book, like for the sake of cheap drama. Like, for example, there's one scene like toward the beginning. I think it's toward the beginning, or maybe first or second act, I can't remember. But there's one thing where Beth tells her husband that she's like, I'd really like to have another baby, because like I said, they have a kid, but she's like a teenager. So in the book, she's like, you know, I'd like to have another baby, and he's kind of like, well, maybe. Like, he's kind of ambiguous about it, like really nervous, and he's like, can we really do this? He's very uncertain, but he's pretty receptive to the idea. And when she does actually supposedly get pregnant later on, he's genuinely like happy about it, like, okay, well, you know, we'll make this work. In the movie, she says, oh, I'd like to have another baby. And he basically like screams at her, no way. No way. You know what I mean? Like, he's a dick, like right from the outset. He's like, absolutely not. And then when she supposedly gets pregnant later on, he apologizes. But I was like, well, there's no like coming back from that. I mean, you basically like got in her face and was like, no fucking way. We're not having another kid, and I don't care. I don't want to hear anything else about it. Like, he didn't want to talk about it. So that's kind of like what I'm coming at. Like, that's what I mean when I say they made a lot more conflict in their relationship than there was in the book. In the book, like I said, yeah, there's minor conflict in the way that I don't know if we should do this. Should we do this right now? But then, like, he was just kind of like, yeah, we can do it. We'll figure it out. Whereas in the movie, he's just like, no, you know what I mean? So there was that. There were a couple other kind of more minor changes, I guess, but they still like bothered me quite a bit. So in the book, Missy Penrose, who is the, you know, the prophet child, in the book, she's actually like pretty terrifying, even though she's just a kid. I mean, she's creepy. The shit she says is creepy. She has, like I said, this corn doll that's like super creepy, and the townsfolk all absolutely believe in every single thing that she says, like every prophecy that she makes. There's a scene where Ned in the book, he's kind of like spying on this ritual that they're doing, which is like some kind of like pagan folk horror type thing, and they kill a lamb, and she puts her hands into the guts and then puts her hands on the cheeks of this guy who is, he's the chosen young lord or whatever. And that scene is like super creepy, because that's kind of one of the first times that Ned is like kind of comes across the people in the town like doing shit like they do, and he's just like, man, that's pretty weird. You know what I mean? So it's like a really, really creepy scene. Like, she's a creepy character. In the movie, and this is no slight against Tracy Gold, but I mean, she was just a kid. She's probably like only 8 when she was in this. And she's kind of like, again, it's like overdone. So, and she shrieks a lot. And so it's kind of like her performance is just more like absurd and funny rather than being creepy, because she's just like overdoing it. You know what I mean? And like I said, I'm not going to pick on her too much because she's just a kid. And she went on to do other stuff later on, but I didn't love it. Like, she wasn't creepy in the book. She was just kind of like funny, unintentionally funny. There's also kind of like a little thing that, this isn't like a huge deal, but it did like kind of bother me. In the movie, they have a neighbor named Robert, and he's just blind. Like, his eyes are white, like he has cataracts or something like that. In the novel, though, their neighbor like doesn't have eyes. His eyes have been removed, and you don't find out until later on like what the implications of that are. And so the movie kind of like gets rid of that kind of like chilling moment too, like why he doesn't have eyes. You know what I mean? That's the thing. And like Ned at the end of the book, like he gets blinded as well. Like at the end of the movie, they blind him, but in the book, they pop his eyes out and they take out his tongue, which they did to another character named Jack Stump also in the book. So like I said, it's a lot more like fucking gory, like a lot more gruesome and a lot more shocking. I have to say, I was also kind of surprised. I don't know if I'm that surprised, like considering, but one of the most, I mean, for me, like the most jaw-dropping scene in the book was kind of partly left out of the movie. Like I said, I understand why they did it, but I don't really know. So in the movie, there's a scene where Nick gets really like ragingly drunk at the husking bee that they're having. And all the townsfolk get pissed off at him because he's like, his daughter is dancing with someone that she's, I don't know, this is like this whole ritualistic thing. And he pulls his daughter out of the dance, and all the townsfolk gets pissed, like, you're ruining the party or whatever. And so he runs off. So he ends up in this stream. And then Tamar, like I said, like town slut, if you want to call her that, no shame. So she comes up to him, and she's like, just getting right up on him, right? And so he gets like sort of pissed off because he's kind of had like a little bit of a flirtation with, I don't even know if I'd call it a flirtation, because she's basically just like trying to jump on the D and like not being real subtle about it either. So he's very pissed off at these sort of like aggressive advances that she's making, and also he's pissed off that he is like, there's like this helpless lust where he like wants her as well, and that's pissing him off even more. So in the movie, like he just sort of lamely attempts to drown her, but doesn't succeed. And she doesn't tell anybody about this. It's just kind of like a standalone little scene that happens. In the book, though, this scene plays out a lot different. Like I said, it's like it's a lot more shocking. I did, seriously, when that happened in the book, I was like, what? It was crazy. So what happens in the book? Ned, at this point, is kind of like knows the town is fucked up and has betrayed him, but he hasn't really acted on it yet. I don't think he's fully processed the extent to which like maybe his life is in danger. Let's put it that way. Now he attempts to tell his wife about, hey, there's all this creepy shit going on, maybe we should get the fuck out of here. And she doesn't really believe him, because she's kind of like gotten seduced into it and like is getting really into the lifestyle, right? And so they kind of have an argument. So he sort of like runs off into the forest or whatever. Now he goes, it's not nighttime like in the movie, it's broad daylight, and he's totally sober, he's not drunk. So he's just like walking around trying to clear his head or whatever, and he sees the stream and he's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just gonna like take a swim, maybe that'll make me feel better. So he, again, just like in the movie, he's approached by Tamar, and she kind of starts to like work the feminine charms on him or whatnot. At this point in the book, Ned knows that she's evil. He knows that she's the one that murdered Grace Everdeen, the one that everybody said committed suicide, and she's also the person that cut out Jack Stump's tongue. So he's like, hey, you suck. Like, you're evil. But at the same time, he's like uncontrollably like lusting after her, and so he's like repulsed by himself, like by his own feelings. And it's implied that she has like some kind of witchcraft or some kind of like folk magic or something like that that's making him feel this way. So because of this conflict that's going on within him, he wants to kill her, and he forces her down into the mud and brutally rapes her. He wants to like obliterate her, pretty much, like with his, it's a shocking fucking scene. It's horrifying, because this is absolutely, and this is what I was saying about like the whole insidious nature of this book. Ned is like a nice dude. He hasn't done anything like this, but it's built up and built up and built up. And it gets to this point and you're just like, holy fucking shit. You just can't believe that he did that the town has gotten to him to this degree. It's like you kind of realize that it was getting into his head, that it was fucking him over, but you didn't realize that it had gone this far until this particular scene, and it's shocking. And like I said, my fucking jaw fell open because I was like, holy fucking crap, because it was like profoundly out of character. But looking back on it, you can see, oh man, yeah, like it was really like getting to him all this time, but it was so insidious and it took so long. So that's why that scene was so shocking and so scary, because it demonstrated how thoroughly the town had gotten to him, and you didn't realize it, and he didn't realize it up until that point. You also realize too how powerful the forces that's working through Tamar, who's using this magic, and by extension like the whole like magic surrounding the town, like how, you know, how evil, how insidious it is. He realizes during the rape that he can't kill her, and that she has essentially triumphed over him, because that's what she wanted. She wanted him to act out that way, and he fell for it, like he did it. And so she ends up, even though in the movie, you know, he tries to drown her and he doesn't do it and she doesn't tell anybody, in the book she immediately goes right to the widow and says, hey, he raped me, which he did. It wasn't a lie. So Widow Fortune, and then like Beth, Ned's wife, finds out about it, and then, you know, things like come to their inevitable head where he gets like fucked up at the end. So it's has a lot more impact. Like in the movie, I just felt like it was just sort of like a throwaway scene, like, oh, we could do like a partial kind of some violence in here, but it didn't really lead to much of anything. Whereas in the book, it was like the catalyst, you know what I mean, that led to the third act, the finale, the final downfall. And the thing about it is, and now that I'm thinking about it, I think like in the book, like the rape had such impact because you had become so close to his character, because he was such a good guy, you know, and you were privy to like a lot of his thoughts and feelings about it, and you realized, holy shit, like the town has really like gotten to him to this extent. So it was a lot more impactful. In the movie, I think even if they had put the rape in the movie, I mean, it's a TV movie. They're not going to put a brutal rape in there, really. But, I mean, you know, they might imply it, but they didn't put it in there at all. And so, but I feel like in the TV movie, it wouldn't have had the same impact, because like I mentioned earlier, the character of Nick in the movie is like such a douche that, you know, oh, he raped somebody. I'm like, yeah, it seems like some shit he would do. You know what I mean? It wasn't like shocking like in the book, because absolutely he would not have done that before. Whereas in the movie, it wouldn't have been that surprising. So it wouldn't have had the same impact or the same effect like on the person watching it, because it just didn't seem that out of character. Whereas in the book, it absolutely did. So I know I kind of went on a long time about this, but I have to say that I wouldn't recommend, like, if you're curious, you know, the miniseries, it's worth watching. It's not terrible. But honestly, if you're going to spend the time, just read the book. I mean, the book is a million times better. And really, the book is like a classic, especially if you're a folk horror, 70s horror. It's so, so good, and it's so, so creepy. It's one of the scariest things I've ever read, in terms of like really getting into your head, you know what I mean? Like really, really scary. And so it's like way better. And I just feel like I kind of wish that they would do another miniseries of this, but like good, you know what I mean? Like maybe make it longer, because like I said, it's like a longer book, because this really needs like a long lead up, and you really have to have a thing, and you really need time to let the town breathe and work its magic on you. Like, you have to get seduced into like, oh, everyone's so nice and I really want to live here and stuff like that. Because in the movie, like I said, they're kind of like rushing it a little bit, where you, as soon as you get there, everybody's like, man, this is a weird fucking place, we need to get out of here. It wasn't like that in the book. It wasn't like that in the book. And that's why it was scary, because you were just kind of like, man, this place is awesome, and like you live there for a while and everybody's awesome and shit like that, and then you're like, oh no, you know what I mean? So it was like that. So I feel like they're gonna remake it. I'm not averse to like them doing another adaptation of it, but this definitely needs a miniseries. I'm talking like a Netflix, like 8-episode shit or something like that. But give it some time, like, and make the town seem awesome at the beginning, but not weird awesome, like actually awesome, like genuinely awesome. And then it's like way scarier when everything like goes to shit. And make the characters nice like they were in the book. It's scarier, I'm just telling you. He's a dick in the movie, and I was just kind of like, when he gets killed at that, I'm like, oh well, you had that coming, partner. It was just kind of like that. Like I said, you don't have to have likable characters, but in a story like this, I think having likable characters like they were in the book like really helped and really ramped the horror up. But yeah, so Thomas Tryon, 1972, what did I say? 1973. Harvest Home. It's a classic, especially if you're into folk horror, so please read it if you haven't. Miniseries, you can watch it if you want, but I wouldn't really recommend it. I think it's kind of hard to get hold of anyway because it was made for NBC back in the old days, but there it is. That'll do it for this installment, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.